Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going deep into the world of Czech public procurement, specifically how to craft a winning bid. So if you happen to be a foreign supplier and you're looking to kind of break into this market, you're definitely in the right place.
Yeah, it's a very unique system with its own set of rules, but, it can seem a little complex at first glance. But once you kind of understand the logic behind it, it actually becomes pretty straightforward.
All right, so let's unpack this a little. For someone who's totally new to this, what is like the most important thing they should know about public procurement in the Czech Republic?
I would say the most fundamental principle is transparency. So everything's got to be meticulously documented, deadlines are very strict, and there's a very strong emphasis on ensuring a level playing field for all the bidders involved.
So no like cutting corners or relying on personal connections?
Not at all. The system is really designed to be objective and impartial. So that means that success really hinges on carefully following the process and presenting a flawless bid.
I got it. So let's say a foreign company sees a project that they're interested in. What are the very first steps they should take?
Well, first and foremost, they absolutely need to obtain the bid documentation for that specific project. This document's kind of like your roadmap. It outlines everything from the scope of the project, technical specifications, client expectations, all the way to the evaluation criteria.
So basically, get your hands on this document and study it like crazy.
Exactly. It should be your Bible. And here's a pro tip. Pay close attention to the language. Sometimes the bid documentation will be in Czech. So if you're not fluent, you'll definitely need to have it translated professionally to make sure that you understand every single nuance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't want to misinterpret something important because of a language barrier.
Exactly. Now, once you have that bid documentation, the next step is to assess whether your company actually meets the qualifications for that specific project.
Yeah.
This might involve having specific certifications, certain financial standing, proven experience in similar projects, things like that.
So it's not just about being like the cheapest or even having the best product. There's certain boxes you need to tick to even be considered.
Exactly. And if you're relying on any subcontractors to meet some of those qualifications, you need to be completely transparent about it. Provide their agreements and make it clear how their expertise contributes to fulfilling the project requirements.
Okay, so transparency and meticulous documentation. Those seem to be key themes here. What about the actual submission process? Is it just emailing a PDF, or is it a bit more involved than that?
Well, traditionally, bids had to be physically delivered to a designated contact point, often in person.
Really? So no, just like emailing or uploading a file?
That was the norm for a long time, yep. But things are starting to change. Electronic submissions are becoming increasingly common, utilizing certain platforms that are designated by the contracting authority.
Oh, interesting. So there's a bit of a transition happening then with how those bids are submitted.
There is, but even with electronic submissions, the emphasis on timeliness remains absolutely paramount. There's usually a very strict deadline, like down to the minute. Any delays can result in an automatic disqualification.
Oh, wow. No grace period. That's intense.
Yeah, it is. The system really doesn't leave any room for error. But the good news is if you do everything by the book, you can be confident that you'll be judged fairly, based solely on the merits of your bid and not on any sort of external factors.
That is definitely reassuring to hear. So let's say we have our bid ready, translated, double-checked everything for accuracy. What are the essential components that absolutely must be included in that package?
So first and foremost, you need very clear identification details about your company. That includes your legal name, your address, contact information, and any relevant registration numbers. It seems obvious, but you would be surprised how often simple errors in this section can lead to disqualification.
Right. You don't want to trip up on something basic like that. What else?
Next, you need to provide a signed draft of the contract. Now, this demonstrates your understanding of the project scope and your commitment to the terms that are laid out by the client.
So it's more than just a formality then. It's like a crucial part of the bid itself.
Absolutely. We'll delve a little deeper into the nuances of contract drafting later on, but for now, just understand that it needs to be meticulous and completely aligned with the client's requirements.
Okay, I've made a note of that. So what comes after the contract draft?
So next, you'll need to provide proof of your qualifications. This is where you get to really showcase your company's expertise and demonstrate why you're the absolute best choice for this job.
I imagine this is where things can get a little more complex. What kind of documents are we talking about here?
Well, it really depends on the specific project, but you might need to include things like your company's financial statements, certifications that prove your technical capabilities, maybe even some examples of similar projects that you've successfully completed in the past.
So it's kind of like putting together a portfolio, showcasing your company's track record and expertise.
Exactly. And remember, clarity is key here. Make it easy for the client to understand your qualifications and how they directly relate to the requirements of their project. Don't make them have to, hunt for information or try to decipher complex jargon.
Got it. So far, we've covered identification details, the contract draft, and proof of qualifications. Is there anything else that's absolutely essential?
Yeah, one more crucial element. If the project involves any subcontractors, their agreements need to be included and very clearly outlined. This ensures transparency and allows the client to evaluate the entire team, not just your company.
So it all comes back to transparency and making sure that the documentation is super clear. But what about the client's perspective? What are their expectations, and how do they actually go about evaluating all these bids?
Well, that's where understanding the Czech public procurement law comes in. This law really dictates what the client, often referred to as the contracting authority, can and must request in a bid. And it sets the framework for how those bids are going to be evaluated.
So basically, it's their rule book.
Exactly. And one of the most important things for bidders to understand is the evaluation criteria. This really outlines how the client's going to assess the bids and ultimately determine who the winner is going to be.
So it's not just about who's the cheapest option then?
Not at all. Price is definitely a factor, but it's not the only one. Other criteria might include things like the company's experience, their technical expertise, the proposed methodology, even their commitment to environmental sustainability.
So it's really about finding the best overall value, not just the lowest price tag, which make a lot of sense.
Precisely. And here's another really important point. The Czech system often requires bidders to disclose their company's ownership structure.
Wait, really? So they want to know who ultimately owns and controls the company?
Yes, it's another aspect of that commitment to transparency. They want to make sure there are no conflicts of interest or any sort of hidden agendas.
Wow, that's pretty in-depth. It really shows how serious they are about transparency throughout this whole process.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it's something that can catch foreign companies off guard because they might not be used to this level of scrutiny.
So essential to be prepared to provide that information. And probably wise to get legal advice if you're unsure about the specific requirements, right?
Absolutely. Having a local expert on your side can make navigating these nuances a whole lot smoother.
Okay, so we've got a good grasp on the essential bid components, the client's expectations, and the importance of transparency. But I want to circle back to that contract draft for a minute. You mentioned it's not just a formality. Why is it so crucial?
Well, the contract draft is where the rubber really meets the road. It's the legal document that ultimately governs the relationship between the client and the winning bidder. And there are two scenarios that you might encounter, each with its own set of considerations.
Okay, lay them on me. What are the two scenarios?
So in the first scenario, the client actually provides the contract draft as part of the bid documentation. They're basically saying, here's what we want, take it or leave it.
So no room for negotiation in that case?
Often very little wiggle room, yeah. It's what we call a binding draft, and it basically means the client is setting the terms, and the bidder must either accept them as is or decide not to participate in the tender.
That sounds like a tough decision.
Yeah.
You really have to weigh the potential benefits of winning the contract against the risk of agreeing to terms that might not be entirely favorable.
Exactly. It's a strategic call. And sometimes walking away might actually be the smarter move. But let's talk about that second scenario. In this case, the client doesn't provide a draft contract at all. This means that you, the bidder, are responsible for creating one and submitting it with your bid.
Okay, that sounds like a whole other level of expertise is needed there.
It does. It gives you more control over the terms, but it also adds a significant layer of responsibility. Your draft contract must meticulously align with all the requirements and conditions outlined in that bid documentation. Any deviations, omissions, inconsistencies could lead to your bid being disqualified.
So it's like a balancing act. You have the opportunity to shape the contract to a certain extent, but you also have to be incredibly careful not to overstep or miss anything crucial.
Precisely. And here's another pro tip. Avoid being overly aggressive with the terms against the client. Remember, they ultimately have the final say. Trying to push too hard can backfire. It's about finding that fair and balanced agreement that protects both parties and sets the stage for a successful collaboration.
Great advice. We've covered a lot of ground already. From the basics of submitting a bid, as essential components, to understanding the client's expectations and the importance of that contract draft. What else do we need to know?
Well, we've talked about the importance of, really meticulous documentation, meeting those deadlines, and presenting a really strong case for your company. But we haven't yet talked about what happens after you hit that submit button.
You mean that nail-biting waiting game?
Yeah.
Where your bid is being evaluated? I always get a little nervous just thinking about it.
Yeah, it can feel a bit like a black box, to be honest. The evaluation process is handled by a committee, and they're appointed by the contracting authority. And their job is to really assess each bid against all this predetermined criteria that we talked about earlier.
So it's like a panel of experts. They scrutinize every detail, weigh each factor, and ultimately they decide which company is going to win the prize, right?
Exactly. And this entire process is strictly confidential. So you won't know who else is bidding, what their offers are, or how your bid is being scored at any stage.
Okay, that does sound a little nerve-wracking. But is there anything bidders can do to kind of improve their chances? Any insider tips you can share?
Well, first and foremost, just make sure that your bid is responsive. And that means addressing every single point in the bid documentation and providing all the requested information without exception.
So no skipping sections or assuming they won't notice if something's missing?
Nope, not at all. The evaluation committee, they're really looking for any reason to eliminate bids. And a failure to fully respond to the requirements, that's a major red flag because they need to be sure that you understand the scope of the project and that you're taking it seriously.
That makes a lot of sense. Responsiveness is key. What else can help a bid stand out, would you say?
Clarity and conciseness are also absolutely crucial. Because the evaluation committee is probably reviewing a ton of bids, so you want to make it as easy as possible for them to understand your proposal.
So no rambling on or burying key points in huge paragraphs of text.
Exactly. Use clear language, bullet points, headings, anything that can make that information easy to digest. Think of it like you're creating a presentation for a busy executive. They need the key points up front and then support it with data and evidence.
I like that analogy. Okay, so we've got responsiveness, clarity, conciseness. Any other secrets to winning over the evaluation committee?
Well, remember, at the end of the day, they're looking for the best value for money. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the cheapest option, but the bid that offers that ideal combination of quality, price, and experience.
So you really need to strike that balance between being competitive on price, but also showcasing the unique value that your company brings.
Exactly. And this is where having a really deep understanding of those evaluation criteria comes in handy. The big documentation usually outlines how the committee is going to weigh each factor. So price might be 30%, experience might be 50%, and so on. Tailor your bid to highlight the areas where you really shine and where you really meet or exceed expectations in each category.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see the strategy here. It's not just about throwing together a bid. It's about understanding the rules of the game and playing it effectively.
Yeah, you got it. And just one final tip. Don't underestimate the power of presentation. Your bid documents should be professional, well-organized, and visually appealing.
So first impressions matter, even in a formal process like this.
Absolutely. Think of it like this. Would you rather read a well-structured report with clear headings and concise language, or a jumbled mess of text and attachments? A really sloppy or disorganized bid, it can really create a negative impression, even if the content itself is strong.
That's a really good point. So it's about showing that you've taken the time and care to present a polished and professional package.
Exactly. It just demonstrates respect for the process and for the client's time.
Okay, so we've covered the evaluation process and how to make your bid stand out. But let's talk about, that moment of truth. What happens if you win?
Well, if your bid is selected, the contracting authority is going to notify you in writing and invite you to sign the contract.
So this is where that meticulously crafted contract draft we were talking about comes into play.
Exactly. There might be some final negotiations on very minor details, but for the most part, the terms should be pretty much what you agreed upon during that bidding phase. Once that contract is signed, you're officially awarded the project and you can begin work.
Wow, that must be a really incredible feeling to have all that effort really culminate in a successful outcome. But what happens if you don't win? Is that the end of the road?
Not necessarily. The Czech system actually has a mechanism for challenging the outcome.
Wait, so there's a possibility for a rematch. That's interesting.
In a way, yes. If you believe that the evaluation process was unfair or that your bid was wrongly disqualified, you can file a complaint with the Office for Public Procurement.
So it's kind of like an appeals court for public procurement cases.
Yeah, you could say that. They'll review your complaint, they'll look at the contracting authority's decision, and if they find in your favor, they can actually order a reevaluation of all the bids. They can even cancel the entire tender altogether.
Wow, that is reassuring to know. So there's a system in place to ensure fairness and accountability, it seems.
There is, but it's important to note that the appeals process can be lengthy and complex, and it's not always successful.
So probably not something that you would pursue lightly.
Yeah.
You need to have some pretty strong grounds to believe that there was a genuine problem with the process.
Exactly. And you'd want to weigh the potential benefits of an appeal against the time, the cost, and all the resources that would be involved.
That makes sense. But overall, it sounds like the Czech public procurement system, while it is complex, it's ultimately designed to be transparent and fair.
It is, and for companies that are willing to invest the time and the effort to understand the rules and play by them, it can be a very rewarding market to break into.
We've talked a lot about the technicalities of it all, but I'm curious about the bigger picture here. What does this system mean for the Czech Republic as a whole?
That's a great question. The Czech public procurement system is more than just a set of rules and regulations. It's really a reflection of the country's commitment to transparency, fairness, and open competition. By leveling the playing field and ensuring that contracts are awarded based on merit, it helps to promote economic growth, innovation, and public trust.
So it's not just about getting the best deal for the government. It's about building a stronger, healthier economy overall for everyone.
Exactly. And it's also about making sure that public funds are used wisely and efficiently. When it's done well, public procurement can actually be a powerful tool for improving public services, infrastructure, and, the overall quality of life in the Czech Republic.
Wow, I honestly hadn't considered that aspect of it before. It's easy to get caught up in the details of the bidding process, but it's important to remember it's all part of something much bigger.
It is, and it's something that's constantly evolving. As technology advances and the global marketplace changes, the Czech public procurement system is adapting to meet new challenges and opportunities.
So it's a dynamic process, always being refined and improved.
Precisely. And that means there's always something new to learn. Whether you're a seasoned bidder or just starting out, it's important to stay informed about all the latest trends and developments.
So it sounds like succeeding in this market really requires a combination of expertise, diligence, and that willingness to adapt.
Absolutely. But for those who are up for the challenge, the rewards can be very significant, not just in terms of winning contracts, but also in contributing to the growth and the development of the Czech Republic.
Well, you've definitely given our listeners a lot to think about today, from the technicalities of bid submission to the broader implications for the Czech economy. We've really covered a lot of ground. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap things up?
I think our listener has a much clearer understanding now of how this system works. And yeah, it's a system that really rewards those who are careful and plan ahead, pay attention to those details.
Absolutely. And if you could just leave our listeners with one final thought, what would it be?
I would say just don't be intimidated. I know it has its complexities, but it's designed to be transparent and fair. So, do your research, be open to learning, and maybe even seek out some guidance from local experts. Any company really can succeed in this market.
It's good to hear that. And, even if a company doesn't win a contract the first time, just going through the process, I imagine, can be a really valuable learning experience.
Oh, for sure. Each bid, every interaction, it's a chance to get a better feel for how things work in the Czech Republic. And it's like a stepping stone to building those relationships and establishing a presence in this market.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, we've covered a lot today. Any final resources or recommendations for our listeners who maybe want to dive deeper or start exploring specific opportunities?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out the Office for Public Procurement's website. They have a ton of information, even in English, on the laws, regulations, best practices, all that. Great place to start if you want to dig in.
Awesome advice. And to our listener out there, the journey of knowledge never really ends, does it? So keep exploring, keep learning, and who knows, maybe we'll see your company's name on a winning bid in the Czech Republic sometime soon.
Wouldn't surprise me at all. Lots of potential here for companies who are ready to make that effort.
Well said. Well, that's a wrap for today's deep dive into Czech public procurement. We hope you found it informative and insightful. Until next time.